up until this point, it's 2025. Since 1945, I mean, how many documentaries have there been specifically looking at the ways that the Nazi regime targeted, tortured, stole, disabled, mentally ill people from their families and then killed them? Zero. This is
Yeah. Can you see this?
I can. If for those of you who are listening, that's wild.
Yeah, so this is the first feature film that solely focuses on Action T4, which is the program that targeted disabled people and how Nazis basically invented mass extermination. So they refine and perfect the gas chamber technology that they go on to use in the Holocaust. And in fact, they continue to use it on disabled people during the Holocaust in a program known as 14F13. I know these programs have all of these lovely acronyms. They love to reduce things to numbers and letters. Sound familiar? But that's really where we start. And my folks are disability studies professors, and this is a part of our family's life's work. Looking at this, we go repeatedly to Germany over the years to visit these sites and to bring disabled people to them. Because when we first go in the 90s, there's no accessibility, and the director hasn't even thought or considered of the idea that a disabled person would want to come visit and partake in the memory of their own history, their killing history. So I think accessibility is front and center in this film. And you really get to see how Americans in particular, how we have had disability removed from our conceptualization of literally living life to the point where it's missing from one of the most historically covered atrocities ever. And so, that's really where the film starts. And
I mean, and you start, and I want you to tell me about your parents, because they really sort of, they brought you when you were a kid first to Germany because they were studying this. And the film opens with your dad, who does use a wheelchair, trying to get to Auschwitz by train, right? I mean, it's obviously that you guys sort of poke fun at this, grim fun at what a horrible, ride this is, but you're going there to do this research and film. But that, even just the idea of visiting it in the year, what year did you go? I mean, it was still very difficult even with a wheelchair.
Yeah, so that was in 1999. And my folks were actually presenting on the history of eugenics in America in Germany, which we don't talk enough about. America actually exported Nazism to Germany. We exported eugenics to Germany. The legalization of forced sterilization, the Nazis drew that from the United States. They actually reference it in the passing of their first sterilization law, that in California, they're having all of these successful forced sterilizations. California goes on to sterilize 20,000 people. The United States sterilizes over 60,000 people. But to Robert Lifton's point, who he's in the film, he's also the author of this incredible book called The Nazi Doctors. He says that this was, in America, there were forces that could limit and end eugenical sterilization and sterilization in general. Whereas in Nazi Germany, there were no forces because Hitler planned this entirely. We actually see Hitler learns in World War I that mass dying, chaotic, uncontrolled death occurs during war, and institutions don't have the resources to provide for those in hospitals. And so he actually intentionally times Action T4 with the start of the war, obsessively so, to the point where he backdates the memo to October. It's a month late, but he backdates it because he wants T4 to occur with the start of war.
So right. Okay. So that is a really interesting piece that stood out to me when I watched the doc, was that in World War I, so many hospitals where, people with disabilities were being taken care of, didn't have the, food or fuel or, cold to keep the heat on. And they were desperate. People were dying. They were sick. And that literally gave, obviously, Hitler an idea to be like, hey, you can do anything when you call it a war. And then, of course, there is war, but it also sort of reminds us I don't want to get to to today, but it sort of reminds us all of these policies that are on the books, but only under wartime, that are now being activated because we're allegedly in a war, whether it's, the invasion from the southern border or whatnot. But this was part of Hitler's eugenics when it came to the German population. If it needs to be spelled out, spell it out. How are disabled people, whether mentally disabled or physically disabled, how do they fit into his little sick world order?
Right. And, I think there are myriad ways that the Trump administration parallels the Nazi regime. And I have the facts to prove it. It is not something just liberally said or thrown away here. For one, the deportations that occur in the beginning, the original plan was not the final solution. It was deporting the Jews to Madagascar and Lublin. And so Action T4, this program, which remains it's a signed piece of paper in Hitler's desk, but it's not actually a legal document. It's not signed into law, but it's in his desk because all these doctors wanted the permission. They're like, Hitler, can you make this a law? And he didn't do it, but he did it more so in secret. Which using that medical bureaucracy, because Germany, coming off of the Weimar Republic, is actually one of the most revered healthcare systems in the world. And so they actually use that, and they make propaganda films highlighting the mansions that disabled people live in. Meanwhile, the German working poor live in these hovels, and they're working and producing. And look at these quote unquote useless eaters and lives unworthy of living that are living in these mansions. So from the very beginning, Hitler knew that he wouldn't be able to get away with this carte blanche, and that he needed to sow public assent to this. So he ran propaganda films in movie theaters before feature films, showing, disabled people in like this uplighting, this monstrous kind of uplighting, really trying to frame them to the public as the problem, as a part of the problem that, he was trying to solve.
Yeah, you have to do a propaganda campaign. Let's just talk specifically about Action T4. What was the program? And you interview people whose family members or who are surviving, descendants of people who were disappeared and killed by this program.
Yeah, which, American history and disability is basically the history of disappearing disabled people. It's not brought up enough that the ugly laws were in place for almost 100 years in America, starting in the late 19th century. And then I believe Chicago is the last city to rescind its ugly law in 1975.
What's an ugly law? What is this?
Yeah, so the ugly laws were these laws in the US that said that if you were malformed, if you had any kind of deformity or something that we didn't like about you, even appearing in a public space, that you were not allowed to be in a public space. So these laws basically quarantine disabled people in the United States back into their homes and say that they are not welcome in public spaces, which I think, this executive order that Trump just released announcing basically RFK's wellness camps, which they are camps. That's what RFK wants to do. He's trying to quarantine disabled people. I think I saw there was some Republican on Fox News that just said that they were sick of seeing obese people at Walmart. And that this RFK effort was all about trying to curate that image. So these parallels are literally one for one. It's not even an exaggeration right now, the parallels here that are going on, and yeah, I won't even stop there. The Nazis offered double, triple pay to people. Junior doctors would become senior doctors. There would be ways that they would incentivize the move to get people along, because Hitler knew that he couldn't do it on your own, that you needed a staff of supporters. You needed to surround yourself with people that were trying to enact the mysticism of whatever they thought it is that Hitler believed, which is another thing that Robert Lifton says says in the film. They're Himmler and Joseph Goebbels and all these others. Goebbels actually says Nazism is just applied eugenics. That's a direct quote from Goebbels. They're all trying to imagine what Hitler wanted. And so you have all these people running around doing little versions of that and trying to enact that, which is all a part of how this occurs. But to get back to your original question, so there were no survivors of T4. So the people we interview in the film, they are the closest that you can possibly get to T4 because nobody that walked into a gas chamber walked out. T4 was a gas chamber. It was 6 of them, in fact. There were 6 major T4 centers spread throughout Germany, Austria, and Poland. Poland is actually the site of the first gas chamber in a military barracks at Fort 7. That's also a part of this too. Hitler knew that you had to export this to the Polish nowhere. Right. In fact, this was a part of how he justifies war. They invade Poland first in 1939. And then to justify moving into the Soviet Union, he cites communism. So this expansion of war, this enactment of war is really important in kind of activating and spreading T4 because it needs the shroud of kind of not being in an urban center. It needs to be outside of the major city, so to speak.
How were kids also taken? Were they convinced? Were they cajoled? Were they just disappeared? How were people actually removed from their families in the first place? Or was it hospitals that were taken over, facilities taken over? Can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, basically it's medical bureaucracy. These were individuals that were taken from institutions, so they were already institutionalized. And my dad's theory in the film is that institutionalization is basically human warehousing. When you have people who are institutionalized, they're already set up to be disappeared. They're already in these, what's interesting is, in fact, so the T4 centers, they were institutions themselves, and they were converted into these gas chambers. They actually transfer the inhabiting populations of those institutions to other places before they set them up. And so there's thousands of these transfer institutions, and so they're transferring disabled loved ones to, XYZ transfer institution, and then you end up at one of the 6 T4 centers, and then you get a falsified document that says that you died of some natural cause or something they make up, basically. In the film, one of these examples is a meningeal infection. It has nothing to do with the victim themselves. It's actually incredibly depersonalized, to the point that the Nazis even didn't think to remove the stairs on the way into the gas chamber. That's like, you would think Germans, right? German functionality, they would have figured out the way to streamline this. No, there are still stairs into the gas chamber to kill disabled people in Nazi Germany. That's how to a fault this perspective is and how hard it holds on to it.
And just, I think you make this assertion, you say this in the film, and I wanted to just sort of clarify that gas chambers were first used on disabled people by the Nazis. Is that correct? They were some of the first people to be killed.
That's correct. Disabled people were the first people to be killed en masse through this systematic slaughter by the Nazis. And it came with a medical veneer. The doctor was the only one that was supposed to pull the gas cock. This is how we end up with people in doctor's jackets sorting people at the gates of Auschwitz. They held on to the medical veneer because eugenics was a fervor that was sweeping the world. Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, coins the term eugenics in the late 19th century, a little over 20 years after the Origin of the Species is published by Charles Darwin, his cousin. And so it starts in the UK, but then, in America, we're ready to receive, and we already have the ugly laws in place, right? Wow. And so then we go on to these forced sterilizations. And then, the Action T4 program spread as far as Trieste, Italy. You had wild euthanasia, doctors who so thoroughly believed in this program that even after the stop order, because there was a stop order, the actual Action T4 program only went on for about a year. And so that's why a lot of the numbers you get are also confusing, because they say around 90,000 were killed in the official T4 period, but the wild euthanasia period after basically through 1945, when Germany is liberated, nurses are still killing patients. And this argument is used at the Hadamar doctors trial, the Nuremberg doctors trials, which there were many, there wasn't just one. And Leon Jaworski, who prosecutes Watergate, he's the prosecutor that proves that, he calls it the Hadamar murder factory. You needed basically participation from every person in the wheel of the machine, from the nurses to the doctors to the stokers, to the people who even dragged the bodies, who dismantled the gas chambers. You needed, if one person said no, the whole thing would collapse. And I think that is, if there was one lesson you were going to take away from Action T4 and Nazi Germany and all of this, it's that resistance is key. And that every time you speak or say something, that is a risk. And that's actually what leads to T4 being shut down, because there's public dissent over it. And Bishop von Galen is a very famous historical figure in Germany who publicly speaks out, and he's very popular, and he's not even like a liberal or left-leaning preacher. He's kind of conservative, but that shuts down parts of T4.
It's interesting because, yeah, I mean, it's the undesirables, right? Obviously, we think about Jews, but then we know, Roma or gypsies, and then I think homosexuals, like all the like, but then disabled folks as well. It's just interesting the way they're like, okay, well, we've got limits, you know what I mean? Like, let's stop this one program, this killing, and we'll continue the other. And I mean, you interview people whose, I believe, is it his great grandfather, someone whose wife was taken, and then said, oh, she died, sorry about that.
Yeah, I believe you're talking about Amelia Rao, who we interview her descendant, Andy Heckler, and his mom is actually the one who puts together the binder of files about Amelia Rao. So many of these documents were destroyed, but about a quarter of them remain. The Stasi's actually destroyed more documents after the Nazis destroyed documents. Wow. And so we have like a quarter of these documents remaining. So many are just discovered that they have familial connections. Just to consider that someone like Elon Musk is telling AfD members in Germany, it's time to move on from the past. Elon, you don't even know about how it started. We literally are lacking information, and you have fundamentally confused remembrance with guilt.
Can I just first of all, I love that you're bringing it to today, and I want to go there because, I've been on a lot of panels, most recently, talking about RFK Jr. On Piers Morgan, debating a bunch of people who are like, I think it was 4 different people, and 4 people, each one of them at some point of this discussion about RFK Jr. mentioned the scourge of fat people, right? Of obesity. I mean, I don't even want to say obesity, right? And just the attitudes that we have toward one another in a moment when the biggest problem with our healthcare system is that it is expensive, inaccessible, discriminatory, on and on and on. It makes money for, shareholders and whatnot. But we have RFK Jr. now at the head of HHS, and it truly is probably one of the most chilling, upsetting appointments, as there's been mass layoffs. And as you see, this is someone who, number one, wrongly links autism to vaccinations, but also isn't clear that he actually even has empathy for autism, just as a condition, right? And sort of continually blames the victims for their own situation. And again, this fat phobia, it's what I think others have called soft eugenics. It's not quite eugenics yet, but it certainly is leading there. And many people have drawn parallels between obsessions with fat, like how one looks, the body, like working out all the time, the alpha male, and sort of the Nazi obsession with the same.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to say about that. And it's just, it really is like a loss of empathy, and also we have to recognize that these politicians, these figureheads, they have openly admitted that they are using these tactics. They are tactics to them. They're not even people. They're tactics that they use to. Trump said that Republicans, a few weeks before the next election, they should bring up trans people as a tactic. So there's a complete loss of empathy and even a realization that these are also humans like you. And RFK Jr., it's just, he's kind of like a laughing stock with the beef tallow stuff. It's
blue
just like
methylene. What is it? What's the stuff he puts in his water? Anyway, yes.
But unfortunately, because these guys are the ones in charge, we really have to take these things seriously because they believe them. We tried to get him on the record saying he was anti-vax, and he ended up saying if I had a time machine, I might go back and stop my kids from being vaccinated. It's like they'll dance around whatever you try to grab them for, because they're looking again. It's like when you say something, when you point and say this is what's going on over here, then that stops that thing, right? And then they might kind of just go over here, and now they're doing, and that's that muzzle velocity, that Steve Bannon talks about. They're trying to make so many things happen at once, but the reality is that they think they need, and they're kind of right, to target these people that they think no one will speak up for, that no one will say anything about.
And then I want to just say, first of all, disabled people have been at the forefront of fights for Medicaid in this country and making sure they don't, it doesn't get Medicaid and Medicare. But now you've got an $880 billion cut coming down the pike that is likely, most definitely going to hit Medicaid. So the war on poor people and specifically disabled people is just, it's raging right now, from all sides. The Social Security situation, making people go in person, never mind there any kind of mobility restrictions they might have, and on and on. And I'm even reminded, before I let you go, it should have been a bigger news story, but Trump's nephew, Fred Trump III, has a son with, I believe, physical and mental disability, a sort of a rare genetic disorder, and he cares for him. And he's, we talked about him on Democracy Now!, how, he's a very awesome, sweet guy. He lives a good life, but it's expensive, right? And he, can Donald Trump help him out? And Trump straight up told his nephew, why don't you just let him die effectively? Why would I help someone like that? And so it is truly at the heart of, that's how these motherfuckers think. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, and it's also funny that for years disabled people fought to have the A included in DEI.
Yes.
And, it's not new to disabled people that the only time it gets included, it seems like, is when they're being targeted. So Trump mentions DEIA when he blames that chopper crash in DC on disabled FAA pilots, which is I know for many people that might have felt like it was out of nowhere, but we can tell you that we knew from the first time he mocked that disabled reporter that this was an ideology within him. And, saying that those disabled people should just die, that really is a continuation of this linear narrative that we've seen with Trump's relationship with disabled people. And I think that during his last presidency in COVID, he saw and learned that you could just let disabled people die through mass negligence.
Yes.
And so now we have Trump 2.0 back in office, I don't think it's soft eugenics. I think this is hard eugenics because he is literally Medicaid and Medicare provide life-saving support to disabled people who can't live without it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the MAID program in Canada. I don't know how much play that gets on this show, but there right now in Canada, you can get killed. You can sign up to be euthanized in a day. And the wait list for a therapist is over a year. And 50% of those cases are BPD, borderline personality disorder. And the only treatment for BPD that works, that's shown to work, is therapy.
Mm-hmm. So wait, what are you saying?
So,
that people are going, you need to take me through that before I let you go.
So yeah, MAID is this program in Canada that is legal, although the way that they're enacting it is questionable at this point. The majority of cases right now, you're supposed to have a terminal illness, but the majority of cases are categorized as other.
So maybe just because people can't get access to the therapy or the meds that they need.
Yeah. So Trump would love to have Canada as a 51st state because they're already enacting eugenics and through euthanasia. And we don't hear about that. We don't hear about Action T4 in the Holocaust. We don't hear about disability issues because it's so removed from the American perspective. And
even though we pioneered it, I mean, and Hitler, I mean, it's not only that. I mean, sterilization was part of the, conquest of the United States, but he also loved that. He loved the, mass genocide of Native Americans in this country. And so the idea, again, that Holocaust, very awful, also has legacies in other dark periods of this country and of the world. But Cameron Mitchell, where can people watch this? Disposable Humanity.
So it's a brand new film. It just hit the festival circuit. It does not have a distributor yet. I know, believe it. It's surprising, but documentaries in general aren't getting support. But even this one that's literally revealing a huge, that Action T4 is the crux of the Holocaust, right? It's something that the people need to know. It can't find distribution because it isn't profitable, or, we've been told, a myriad of things like that, the studios can't make the money that they would expect off of this. So we really encourage people to follow us on Instagram at Disposable Humanity and sign up for our mailing list on disposablehumanity.com. That's awesome. How we show demand, and we show these executives and people that think that disabled content, that disability stories aren't in demand, that they very much are.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.